Hello YouTube! Welcome back to my channel and thank you very much for watching this new video. So today I'm going to talk about a game that I played a lot when I was a kid, Microsoft Flight Simulator. My first version was a 4.0 release. My dad offered me the game in 1992 and I have to say it was an amazing gift as I finally had the chance to fly a plane on my computer. But to be honest, I have to admit that I was a little bit disappointed with the visuals. Even at that time, I found that those bright green and blue uniform colors made the visuals too unrealistic. But despite this little disappointment, my excitement about learning how to fly a plane was still there. And as the game manual was quite detailed, with the help of my dad, we started to read about the basics of flying from scratch. Well, getting some theory was something, but in practice, trying to fly the airplane using the keyboard only was a complete different story. In the early 90s, it was not that common to have a joystick like nowadays. The only maneuver we managed to fly was a straight and level flight, and as soon as I was trying to make a turn, I was losing control of the plane and ended up crashing most of the time. Fortunately, not a long time after this, in 1993, the version 5.0 was released. We finally invested in a new joystick like this one, and I have to say it completely changed my whole simulation experience. On top of that, the game visuals were as well greatly improved, and we had for the first time ground texturized graphics, giving us much more realism. I felt as well that my flying skills were improving, and I was finally able to attempt landings for the first time. Okay, of course, not perfect landings, but at least I was almost not crashing the plane anymore. From this release of Microsoft Flight Simulator, I became a big fan of the whole series. With the 2000 Professional Edition, we even had the opportunity to fly the Concorde. The user manual was again very detailed, and for example, it explained some of the challenges related to supersonic flights. Here we can see that if the realism setting was set to the maximum, we had to manage the center of gravity position at different phases of flight by manually transferring fuel. This was a real procedure used by Concorde pilots to compensate some aerodynamic phenomena at high speeds. This release of Microsoft Flight Simulator was also my introduction to the use of navigation instruments. My objective was to make real-time flights between cities in a plane like the Boeing 737 using the autopilot as much as possible. Unfortunately, without proper information and knowledge, many aspects of instrument flying remained a mystery for me, like how to read an approach chart and how to set up the airplane for an ILS approach. But let me come back to this point later in the video. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2000 was the last release I remember playing as a kid. I will not go through the later versions, but I know that they became more and more realistic to a point that real airline pilots are now using the game as a home training device. I'm actually more interested about the versions from the 90s, the one that I played as a kid. And I'm wondering now how realistic they were for the time. Was Microsoft Flight Simulator realistic enough to fly an ILS approach? And what about those graphics, like the one that I initially felt were so bad? To answer those questions, I will use Microsoft Flight Simulator 98. The graphics were still very similar to the 5.0 release, but we have access to more airports and to the Boeing 737-400 with an improved autopilot. So now, to be able to judge the quality of the graphics, we need to compare with what was available for professional pilots at that time. So I did some research. On this picture, we can see the cockpit of an old Beechcraft 200 simulator. The visuals were produced from what appear to be CRT screens, and I have to say they look quite basic. Here is another approach on another simulator, and honestly, it doesn't look much different from the 4.0 Microsoft version. Here, as another example, we can see the outside of an early Boeing full flight simulator. These type of simulators were costing millions of dollars, and some of those early models only had black and white graphics. Here we can see the approach from a Boeing 727, and the visuals were limited to night operation due to the lack of colors. But for me, it doesn't look that bad, and for sure it's sufficient for the purpose of training pilots. So in terms of graphics, I have to give credits to Microsoft, because now comparing with what was available in simulators for professional pilots, I have to say that Flight Simulator game visuals were actually not so bad. Alright, now it's time to test the technical aspect of the game. So let's switch on my Windows 98 laptop and let's go for a test flight. We will be around runway 07 at Paris Orly Airport. To hide a little bit the poor graphics, I will set the time at night, like in the 727 simulator. I managed as well to find a Jepsen ILS approach chart from 1997 matching the period of the game. This is a very important detail, as some information may change with time, and then, for our test, we won't be able to judge if it's due to an error in the game or just the fact that we are playing with outdated data. So, to verify that Flight Simulator 98 is accurate to fly an ILS approach, we will have to check those points: the radio navigation frequencies, the final approach course, the distance at which we intercept the glide slope at the platform altitude of 3000 feet, and finally, and to be honest that would be the cherry on the cake, that the outer marker check occurs at the correct distance and altitude. Of course, another important information on the approach chart is the minimum descent altitude, as we can see here. But I'm not sure if we can set it in the game, so I've set the weather conditions to see the runway early enough so it won't be an issue. So now we are finally lined up on runway 07, and as we are in the game and having no traffic around us, we can take the time to set up our instruments and the autopilot for the ILS approach. The first thing we can do is to tune the ILS and VOR frequencies. We have two navigation panels. In the first one, we can select the ILS frequency Oscar Romeo Echo 108.5, and in the second panel, the VOR Oscar Lima frequency 111.2. Alright, perfect. So we can already see that we have a DME indication from the VOR and that the localizer is centered. It's a good sign, but to be sure that we are receiving the correct radio signals, we always have to identify them first. For this, we just need to listen to each identification Morse code, and if it matches with the one shown on the chart, it means that the signal is reliable. So, for the ILS, we click here, and wait until we can hear the Morse code. Alright, okay. It was quite fast, but we can hear that it's matching with the chart, so it means it's good. We click on the same switch so we don't hear it anymore, and we do the same for the VOR. Yes, perfect, it's matching as well. So now we can say that the frequencies are correct and that we are receiving the proper signals. Now the next step is to preset the autopilot. We can see here the autopilot control panel with different modes and windows. We set in the course window the final approach course of 065, as we can see on the chart. The second window is to set the target heading. So we can initially set the runway heading, which is 065 as well. The next window is for the target altitude. And as we stay around the airport, there is no need to climb too high. So we can just directly set the platform altitude of 3000 feet. The speed window is where we set the target speed. 210 knots is a good flap-up speed. No need to go too fast as well. And finally, we have to set the target vertical speed, and here for the climb we can set 1200 feet per minute. Another very important step as well, for the autopilot to maintain the speed, we need to arm the auto throttle arm switch, as we can see here. Alright, the autopilot is now fully configured. We can set the flaps to 5 And we are now ready for takeoff. Alright, we just saw that Flight Simulator 98 passed all the elements we wanted to check. It means that if you were a student pilot in the late 90s, you could have practiced IFR maneuvers like hold entries or ILS approaches. Of course, in the game, the Boeing 737 cockpit is far from being accurate. Many features are still missing. But now, just for the fun, I wanted to try with the help of modern technology like a bit of Photoshop, sound effects, and video editing, how far we can push the realism of Flight Simulator 98. So let's replay our last takeoff and landing, but this time with a bit more realism.
Flight Team 98, wind 080 degrees, 12 knots, runway 07, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 07, Flight Team 98.
Alright, lights on.
Cabin crew, prepare for departure.
Alright, let's go. Takeoff. N1, Toga. Takeoff thrust set. Check. 80 knots. Throttle hold. V1. Rotate. Positive climb. Gear up. Check. Engage LNAV. LNAV green. Check.
Flight Team 98, contact departure on 121.05, safe flight.
We contact departure 121.05, Flight Team 98, goodbye. Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
Runway in sight. Check.
Flight Team 98, wind 080 degrees, 15 knots, runway 07, clear to land.
Clear to land, runway 07, Flight Team 98.
1000.
Check. Autopilot off.
Plus 100.
Check.
Minimums.
Continue.
$50, $40, $30, $20, $10.
Speed brakes up. Reverses normal. Check. 60 knots. Check. Manual braking.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Paris-Orly Airport. Local time is 9:10 in the evening and the temperature is 10 degrees Celsius. We would like to thank you for joining us on this trip and we are looking forward to seeing you soon on our next video.